Okay, everyone, this is Lord Vasquez, and I just came back from seeing the 2019 version of The Lion King. Now, as most people have pointed out, this is not, quote, live action. It's more of uh, a highly rendered 3, 3D film. It's done to a level where the uncanny valley does not exist. So that's one good thing. The only problem is that their drive to make uh, it be more realistic somewhat defeats the first act. In that the first act is supposed to be far more majestic. Um, because when it opens up with a more realistic sun rather than having the more hazy effect of the sunrise um, with all the atmospheric effects kind of bled out, and uh, the rest of the sequence is pretty shot for shot. There are differences in the shots, certain differences in the shot, but most of it is almost shot for shot. But because of kind of a weak when the sun appears, it comes off a little weaker, but it does do its job. Um, the So it makes the first act seem a lot weaker. It picks up a little bit when the characters are interacting, but then when you get into "I can't wait to be king" because of the drive for realism, um, it somewhat uh, saps the scene. As in the original, it was more not a real Africa, but kind of Africa seen through the eyes of a child, what a child would think Africa would look like to it. So um, when you see what it's doing, you can appreciate it. You can sing the song along with the songs, but it it could have used more of a different style change as they did in the original. Make it seem a bit more brighter and a bit more, even dare say a little bit more cartoony, so that it would convey convey the feeling of the original, and kind of um, be prepared. Kind of comes off even is the weakest because it was kind of put in last minute, and it shows uh, the film doesn't really start to pick up until the wildebeest, and from there the film gets its own stride and gets its own stride, so that even when it deviates from the original, it feels like its own film. It feels enough of its own film in the last two acts, um, adding some more complexity into the conflict, uh, enough complexity into the conflict that you understand where uh, where and why certain events happen that were kind of cut out, that they put in, that were cut out from the original film, and just makes the movie even broader in the sense, um, to it reaches to its final conclusion, and it really kind of really nails it. Uh, in this case, it does enough of its own thing that is different and structured, and it doesn't completely save it, but it does enough that it makes it watchable. And I kind of wish the first half had chosen either go with a more classic tone or go like the rest of the film with a different tone. But I think that the first half had a kind of impossible task, and the second half, well, not the first half, but the first act had a Herculean task, and the second two acts uh, were more got expanded on in ways that bridged and made it more interesting. So basically, the first act uh, and the third act, the first act and the second and third act seem don't seem to. The first act seems almost separate from the final two acts, and it's very much um, could have used more cohesiveness. Other than that, I think that and Be Prepared could have they should have put some more effort into Be Prepared, but it's a good film overall. It's enough that it's a you can pretty much it unlike the other Disney uh, remakes. This one has enough of itself that it can more or less stand on its own, but it's never going to be able to compete with the original. The original was classic for a reason. So, and this one kind of half copies, half comes up with plot points that were expanded on in other mediums and were put back into the film so that portion becomes stronger. The I like to also put a side note on this in that I'm not too sure if when the part that uh, when Mufasa died, the death of Mufasa in this version hit me harder than the original, and I think it's because it's a CG character and not um, it's a CG character and not a hand-drawn character that it made me think of my own father and his death, and uh, feeling feeling all the pain that I uh, felt when was afraid to express because my father had told me for years not to cry, uh, not to cry. He called me a baby, essentially for being emotional to the point where, as I've grown older, I've kind of wonder if I come off as unfeeling because of it, and the scene just let everything came out. Everything I've been holding back for 10 years all came out, and I cried a little bit beyond the scene as I was trying to recuperate. But basically, everything came out in that scene, and it it was really a hard thing to re-experience again. In part, uh, the CG is great. It's stellar. There is no uncanny valley. The mouths, they're not like the faces aren't super expressive, but they manage to convey enough that you could read their emotions a lot more, especially in the second half, especially in the second third act after the wildebeest. Um, and I'm not too sure if it was just that I was more receptive after that point, or but I felt like I could read their emotions much better. And there are some really funny parts. Um, and there are some funny parts in there, and they come out with their own creative solutions to problems that were in the film, their own solutions to certain scenes that get their own chuckles. Um, would I recommend that Disney fans watch it? Yes, if for no other reason that you can say I watched this film and it's fine. It's a fine film. Uh, does it compare to the original? No. The original is going to always be classic, but this one has kind of more grown up. Um, the message is slightly different in the original. A lot of people say that it's kind of uh, a lot of people say that it's a lot more problematic. That it's quote anti-communist and stuff like that. But this one seems to reflect now, in that it's not so much anti-communist socialist. It's more ironically and maybe by mistake, but I would be anti-libertarian, and that one line kind of refaces what Scar's true motivations are. You know, when you hear him, he says, and this will be in spoiler. I guess I put it on spoiler warning. He says what in the beginning he says the exact same line he starts from the beginning, where he's saying, "Oh, life is unfair," and that we're all eating for scraps. But then he does something a little later in the film where his motivation is somewhat more revealed, that he's not fighting for equality. He's not fighting for equality. What he wants is to do whatever he wants, despite what it may happen to people. In other words, it's more anti-libertarian than anti-communist, anti-socialist. In fact, what that new little piece of insight that you know uh, we need to be strong, and the strong must do what it is very much in tune with libertarianism and Trump's sort of neo-fascism, where the idea that the and the hyenas kind of feel more because the characters are now all African, uh, or either black actors or African actors. Um, the message kind of comes off more uh, taking on the the idea that Gar wants to, take what he wants, regardless of how it affects the circle of life, how it affects life. And Timon and Pumbaa's message of Hakuna Matata itself gets challenged, uh, where it says, "Oh, uh, don't worry, there's no problems." But when he and Nufa and Simba goes out, and as he grows, at first welcomes the idea, but as he grows older, he begins to realize that his worldview is, well, wrong. He realizes that he needs to change his views and start doing something much more, uh, that Kuna Matata is not enough, and that he, among the while living among uh, the Timon and Pumbaa and all the other outcasts that are in this valley, he comes to respect uh, all the animals as equals, far more than either uh, his Mufasa or and far more than Scar, in that he comes to know, the prey, and realizes that they have their own, um, their own wishes and their own desires. So he learns kind of humility and respect far more even than his father did. And so, when he comes to Pride Rock, he comes to understand what his father understood, but understands it in a different context than his father did. Understanding that the circle of life isn't just eat, eat, you know, you know, you know, eat or be eaten, but also that survival isn't just oh, I care only for myself, but I must care for those around me, even those who may be viewed as less or lesser than, and that uh, all things must have respect in comparison to Scar, who thinks that everything is meant for him. He must control everything. He tries to control Sarabi. He tries to control. He sends out the hyenas to hunt all the prey to the point that they're all running away just to survive, because he doesn't respect the the fact that he he wants his he wants his fill, uh, but doesn't understand why the respect that he needs. So he does not get that respect uh, from Sarabi or anyone else, where he is so fighting for respect, but not giving respect, not understanding the responsibilities of being the king of Kite Rock. Uh, and so, in his exile, he comes to he comes to understand what his father meant. But it only takes Rafiki to finally, be the force uh, that puts it all together and says, everything you've learned from these two and from your father are not incoherently, are not inconsistent. They are the same, and that you must take these lessons forward. While Scar never took the lessons that he was given, and uh, makes excuses, uh, turns on his turns on everyone, and ultimately it leads to his downfall, where he decides to, in saving his own skin, sell out uh, his most important supporters, and it's his supporters that end up destroying him. He's already defeated, but his supporters, the hyenas, finish him off, which is what happens in the original. But in this case, you 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 get the sense that he deserved it even more because he didn't respect anything or anyone. He just didn't get it. And so the message becomes even clearer. It's not um, about either defending or destroying the class system. It's understanding that class system, and understanding that the class system not only uh, why the class system exists, but the need for the class system to be more fair if it has to survive, because it falls apart when certain people think that the higher classes are so much more important that they cannot have any restrictions, and that leads to the downfall. And it's only when the forces that understand that this selfish way of thinking helps no one, and that we all need, a bone every once in a while. It may not be perfect, but it can be more fair. And so I think it did it message wise. I think it kind of did it better here. It's just that the presentation is um, it's a lot weaker, so it doesn't really come across. But I think it does it it is a bit more progressive, and um, and you kind of get the message here. So hopefully, uh, so overall, it's a good movie. You can skip it if you want to, but I think it would be a shame to not at least see it once and say, "Oh, it's all right. It's bad." Personally, I think Disney's all right films do a lot better than a lot of people's than a lot of other studios all right films. It's just that Disney has such a high standard in the past, so that whenever it does anything, has films and stuff that are such high standards that whenever Disney does anything mediocre, it stands out even more. It stands out even more. Um, so when something becomes mediocre, even if it's good, if it doesn't live up to the uh, standards that people come to expect from Disney, it comes out even more. So but I think it is a good film to watch and to discuss and to brew about. But I guess I've taken your time. If I had to give a score, I probably would say 4 out of 5. The Lion King would get straight fives. Um, Other than that, um, good evening.